All right. Sounds great to me. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here again with you guys today virtually.
This meeting is being recorded.
Onto our, oop, there we go. As we are moving into our second of, I think, five total sessions in this series. And I'm so happy that you were able to come back. And if this is my contact information. It's the same as last time. If you were able to get it down last time, you don't need to change anything. But if you're new, you can take all of this information and reminding you that my Pinterest is really any of the strategies or supports that you're looking for to work with kids. And then my live binder is more of the professional resource for you and for your continued education if you'd like to learn more. I know that Beth is putting that into the chat, which is awesome. Thank you so much, Beth, for doing that. But these resources are very big. I have a lot of information on those things. So if you have trouble finding anything or have questions about anything, just shoot me an email. I'm happy to kind of direct you in the right spot. But we'll go ahead and get started. And before we get started, I know, Beth, we want to make sure we acknowledge the funding.
Yeah, my name is Beth Ash, and I work at Bowling Green State University. And we have a grant through the U.S. Department of Justice that has a goal of preventing school violence. And we're hoping to do that through offering mental health and well-being trainings like this one here. And so that's why we're able to do this. So thank you for joining us.
And I also put this in here, Beth. I'm not sure if you want me to come back to that at the end, maybe. Okay, I'll come back to that at the end. I mean, you guys could just preemptively tell me I'm amazing. That's
Yeah.
also do that. All right. So I wanted to make sure that we just did a brief overview of what we talked about the last time, just to make sure we were all back on the same page again. And what I will say of this series, the session that we did last time, I feel is probably the most heavy in content in relation to kind of an emotional response to that. And so please, if you need to, turn your camera off or do whatever, do what you need to do to take care of yourself during this session. But I'm hoping that we're on to the solutions portion at this point, and hopefully we can get some good tools to use. But I did want to briefly talk about trauma and remembering that it's not just that sad and scary thing that happens to children. It is a sad and scary experience that I am perceiving alone, that I don't have that adult buffering. I don't have that adult that's helping me navigate how I'm feeling or advocate for my needs. There's just no one there, and I'm experiencing it alone. And also that key piece of perception. And the perception piece makes it difficult to define trauma because what is trauma to one person may not be trauma to another person, all based on a whole bunch of things like your age, your developmental ability, your environment at the time, what you actually just saw and heard. All of those things can change and be variables in whether or not someone perceives something as trauma. So, I think for me, it's never really like my goal to like figure out if people have experienced trauma. When I think about trauma, I try to make my actions reflect positive intent and positive actions, assuming that everyone in front of me has experienced trauma, because I don't need to know to do the trauma informed practice. So you'll also remember that we talked about. Oh, probably should have clicked through those. Didn't do it. We talked about that research piece, that was the adverse childhood experiences study that was Dr. Felitti and Dr. Anda. And this was the probably the last bigger slide that I showed you. And this is really just showing that this impact is more than just something that they've experienced that they can leave at the door. That when kids experience trauma, it's something that gets kind of cooked into everything that we do, and it affects how we cope and how we have relationships with other people, and it can even lead to early death. And then we talked about the historical trauma as well, and how for many children this is generations in the making. Now, I know I shared with you guys, I probably did, that we in education are the absolute like most empathetic human beings in the world, particularly towards children. And so we genuinely care. We really are connected and invested in the lives of our kids, and our hearts just open up. And we want to just love on these kids so much, especially when we know that something scary might be happening to them. And I also know about us though that sometimes like maybe come March or April, right? We might be sitting in the place of like, I know you're going through something, but like, oh my gosh, stay in my classroom, right? Where it's just like we get frustrated because of how much work we're being asked to do, and the stress that we're under ourselves. So whenever I find myself in that moment of like, oh my gosh, just stay in my classroom, I try to think of this pyramid in my head and really remember that, that this something that they're experiencing is going to impact every part of their life, possibly for the rest of their shortened life. And that, again, for many of them, it's generations in the making. So if I'm expecting like this, like, one lesson plan with these objectives are going to turn that all around in 6 weeks, I'm setting myself up for some pretty big frustration. What is awesome about us as human beings is that we have the ability to grow, we have the ability to learn, and we have the ability to make a really big difference in the lives of kids. And but I know that we get kind of bogged down a lot in behaviors. So, oh, I'm just going to show you this one too. Um, So this slide was really meant to just say how it affects every part of us. It really does. I used to think about my trauma as something that I would carry in a backpack, but I didn't like how that implied that I could set it down, right? I like the painter's palette because I can see splashes of my trauma kind of on everything. And I like seeing that it's a part of everything that I am. It's not everything that I am, even though this is my job. It's still not a part of everything I am, but it is a little part of it. All right. So, as I said, we get bogged down in behaviors. Now, I think this is probably the first new slide. Did I show you guys this slide last time? I don't think so. Anybody recognize this? No. Okay. So this is one of those iceberg ideas of how we see these behaviors and how really they are always just signaling to us that there's something else going on. I think that when we're looking at the behaviors, we get caught in this like behavior hamster wheel. I don't know if you've ever been there, right? Where like you're saying, "Oh, he won't stay in my classroom. Do you have any strategies?" And then someone gives you the strategy and they say, "Okay, here's how you can take data." And you're like, "All right." And you're like, "Yes, he's staying in the classroom 4 days a week. Yes, he's staying in the classroom 2 days a week. Yes, he's staying in the classroom all 5 days of the week." But now he's just kind of like wandering around touching stuff. Do you got any interventions for that? And we get another strategy and another way of taking data. And we're like, yes, yes, yes. But now he's starting to like flick little pieces of erasers at everybody. Do you have a strategy for that? Have you ever found yourself in that behavior wheel where it's like once you solve one behavior, a new one pops up? And that will always happen. You will never catch them all because we use behaviors for two big reasons. And I know that there's like the functions of behavior and all of that, but I just want to simplify it even more into two main reasons. We use behavior to communicate, and we use behavior to cope. Those are the two big reasons why we use behavior. Anybody recently use a behavior to try and communicate something? I'm raising my hand because I have. So my favorite story to tell about this, it's been a while now, but I was feeling stressed at work, overwhelmed with how much I had to do at work. So in turn, also overwhelmed with the amount of work I had to do at home. And I started to notice that I was the only person emptying the dishwasher in my house, right? Now, here's me, a grown up with this specific job, this specific set of education and skills. I literally have every tool available to me to have a respectful, mature conversation with my husband about how I need more help at home. Do you think I chose that route? Mm-mm, I did not. I did not choose that route. Instead, I thought, okay, I'm just going to stop emptying the dishwasher. And I felt like that in itself was going to give like some big clear message to my husband that I needed more help, right? So a couple days goes by, a couple of days, you guys. And he comes in and he's like, "Hey, Missy, what's going on with the dishwasher?" And I'm like, I don't know what is going on with the dishwasher, right? And now we get in this big fight over where coffee mugs go and who gets home from work first. And it all spirals into this moment where I'm like, it's not even really about the dishwasher itself. And my husband's like, well, what's it about? Right. So here we are in this moment, me, a grown up who has this specific education and skill set and all the tools in the world. And I still resort to using behavior to communicate. And not only is that communication ineffective, but it actually caused problems for me that I didn't need, right? What are we expecting out of a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 17-year-old? We all use behavior to communicate. And sometimes kids, they know the languages that we speak, right? They can speak the same language as us. And sometimes they'll just walk in your classroom and just say, "Hey, my mom and dad got in a fight last night. My dad's going to jail." Just out with it. Well, okay, right? We heard that. Sometimes they show us in their creative writing. Sometimes they show us in their art. Sometimes they show us in their play. Those are all those languages that we know how to read and we know how to engage with. And so it's in those moments that we envelope that child in empathy, right? Because we can see that they're going through something. But not all kids know how to speak our languages. Sometimes all they know how to do is this. You guys, we lose empathy very quickly on that little clicking sound, right? We're like, "Oh my God, give me every pen you have. Like, give me everything, clear your whole desk," right? And sometimes we even make this about us. Now, I had probably been told in a training at least 475,000 times that I can't take a child's behavior personally, right? Um, that's tough to do. Way easier said than done. First off, this job is personal to me. Also, it's kind of hard not to take it personal when they're like, "No, Missy, what I'm trying to tell you is that I hate you, and I'm not the only one here. Everyone hates you," right? It's hard not to take that personal when they make it personal. But the thing about behavior is it's not about us. It's always about ourselves. It's always about themselves, right? We use behavior to communicate something. And so instead of asking myself, "Man, what's this kid trying to do to me?" I could ask myself, "What's he trying to tell me?" Because it's something. I'm overwhelmed. I'm hungry. I'm scared. What if someone finds out? He's trying to tell you something. He just doesn't have the same language that some of the other students have, because we use behavior to communicate and we use behavior to cope. And I think sometimes we forget that we use behavior for coping, and just really thinking about what coping is. So you don't need to share with me or anything. There's no shame here. But I'd like for you to think about a behavior that you go to when you're stressed, maybe a behavior you wish you didn't do so much. So for example, I am going to be thinking of Frosties, right? Like Wendy's Frosties, right? This is ice cream is my vice of choice. So thinking of that in my head, recognizing that when I get stressed out, ice cream makes me feel something and I feel better and and it works, right? Um, but now I want to think about how we can intervene on those behaviors. So what I want you to do is put that behavior that you're thinking of that you wish you didn't do so much. I want you to put it just to the forefront of your mind, just thinking about it right now. And let's see if we can have like a by Zoom miracle happen this Monday evening. Okay. So that thing that you're thinking of, let's take a nice big deep breath in and out. All right. I want you to stop it. Did it work? Were you able to quit? No, that's not how coping works. Okay, let's try this one. Let's try this one. Okay. That thing that you're thinking in the front of your head, you wish you didn't do so much. The next time I see you do that, I'm going to point it out to all of your friends and I'm going to take away points. Were you able to quit? That's not how coping works. All right, you guys, last chance for the Zoom miracle. The next time I see you do this, I'm going to send you home for 3 days. And when you come back, I want it gone. Oh, more frosty time for me, right? Thank goodness. 3 days off. Once we start remembering that behavior is about communication and coping, it starts to kind of call to question the ways that we try to intervene at school. We're not really addressing the issue. That is why there will always be another behavior, because once we stop one behavior, the coping need doesn't go away. They just have to find a new one. And unfortunately, as humans, I just feel like we always just go to the negative ones first. Like, I mean, it is so much easier to get a Frosty at Wendy's than to like run in the morning. It's like a stress reliever, right? We tend to go to the easy coping skills, and they're not always good for us or good for the people around us, but we have to cope. So if we start thinking about this coping, all right, okay, so this is coping. So how does coping work? Well, has anyone ever successfully quit a coping mechanism? Anyone, if you have, you can say in the chat. You don't have to, but it's one of these things that is like a whole different monster. So I quit smoking, and I smoked for 10 years, and my husband. I met my husband. First off, you got to know about me. I absolutely loved smoking. I loved everything about smoking. I love, like, oh my gosh, I met all my best friends from smoking. That was the only time I would get a break when I worked at a restaurant, right? It's spring day, windows down, smoking a cigarette. I loved it, right? And then I met my husband, and his mother smoked, and he never wanted to date a smoker, right? But I mean, how could he resist? Right? He couldn't resist, right? He had to take me out. So it kind of got to that point in our relationship though, where like we had been together maybe a year, and I was like, fine, okay, I'll quit smoking, And I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go on to, at the time, the CDC had a smoking cessation program called becomeanex.org, ex.org, like an ex-smoker. And it was crazy because you went onto this website, and the very first thing you had to do was you had to take a quiz to see if you were ready to quit smoking. It was like a little like Cosmopolitan magazine quiz, right? And so I take this quiz, and it was like, "Oh, Missy, you're not ready to quit smoking." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, see, even the program says I'm not ready to quit smoking. This is so great, right?" So because there were all these other things I had to do first. One of the things that it told me I had to do was find hotspots, places that I really want to smoke. So, for example, I picked one of my spots was driving. Like I said, that spring day, windows down is the best, right? I loved it. I keep my cigarettes in that center console of my car. And so, according to the website, it said you have to find yourself an alternative coping mechanism, right? Very formal. I, in earnest, I printed off this whole PDF of ideas of what objects I could get that would become my alternative coping mechanism, right? I go to Walmart, I walk out with a baby teether. And it was one of those that are like the water bubble ones that you can freeze for babies, right? And it fit right on my gear shifter in my car. I was like, this is perfect, right? So according to the website, every time I was supposed to grab that or wanted to grab that cigarette, instead I was supposed to grab that baby teether. I'm like, so I mean, I did it, right? I tried to put the thing there, but I probably stared at that baby teether for like 3 months before I even picked it up for the first time because I loved smoking. But on one day, it was actually a particularly good day I was having at work. I was on my way home, and I'd already had a couple cigarettes, and I went down to grab another one, and I saw that baby teether, and I'm like, what the heck? Right? All right, well, now one out of my 10 cigarettes in the car were going to the baby teether. Over the next couple of days, I was like, yeah, I could probably do that once in the morning too. So now two out of my 10 cigarettes in the car were going to the baby teether. And over the next couple of weeks, the next couple of months, I got to 3 out of 10, 5 out of 10, 7 out of 10, and then I got to 9 out of 10 cigarettes. We're going to that baby teether. I hung out there forever. I did not want to let go of that last cigarette. But when I did, I never went back. And let's see, it'll be, it's 15 years ago that I quit. So that's how coping works, right? Coping is this whole different monster that kind of clings to your ribs. It clings to everything that you do, right? And it takes a whole lot to change those behaviors. And the alternative coping mechanism of choice has to exist. I have to have something there that I can do to cope because otherwise I'll fall right back into that ice cream, right? I'll fall right back into that. So when we start thinking about behavior as communication and we think about it as coping, it starts to give me exciting hope and promise because there were so many times that I felt like I had, working with students, you're working with these behaviors and it's like the push the boulder up the mountain only to have it fall in on you kind of work, right? It's the face in the mud, everything's so hard kind of work. And I've had days like that. And there was one day in particular, that it's been years ago now, but I was having an especially bad day and I really did. I was kind of lost in what I could do more. Like, what more could I do to help teachers? What more strategies could I do? And I just kind of felt a little hopeless. And it was in that moment that I actually had an epiphany. And this epiphany moment happened to me in a public restroom. This is a true story. So, my epiphany happened to me in a public restroom. And I was sitting as you do, and on the door in front of me, there was this flyer, nothing fancy, white paper, black ink, right? But on that flyer, it said this. It said, when a flower won't bloom in your garden, you enrich the soil, not change the flower. When a flower won't bloom in your garden, you enrich the soil, not change the flower. You guys, I was like reborn into this message. I like go out to my car and I'm like, oh my gosh, so many things I had never thought of before, so much that I have control over that I've never even thought about. It was like fireworks. We could do this, we could do that, we could do this, we could do that. And then it all came to like a screeching halt inside my brain because I realized that I was going to have to talk to teachers about their soil. We get really defensive about our soil, right? You guys don't know me from anybody. When I come in, you're like, "Ugh, we saying my soil's not rich." No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying your soil's not rich because I actually can see how rich your soil is for these flowers. But this flower needs something different, and it's on us. We have to do something different. Because I know one thing for sure, and that is that we would never call an orchid bad because it doesn't grow the way dandelions do. It's just different and it's on us. We have to do something different. And as I said, this filled me with so much hope because all of a sudden there was so much more that I could do. I was so empowered to be able to make such big change in the lives of kids, but it takes self reflection and self criticism, which is one of the hardest things for us to do as human beings. And the way I like to think of this quote and how I frame it and how we're going to frame it for the rest of our time today, this is one of those things that is mandated absolutely in everything that we do. Probably weren't thinking that I was talking about PBIS, but it fits real nice into PBIS work and the work that we're already doing. And when I think about, yeah, okay, so what is the soil? That's that 80 to 95% of stuff that we're doing every day, all day. And then there's the fertilizer. I thought that was cute. That's at the tier 2 level, right? And then we have flower interventions up top. Now, flower interventions can be wildly successful, but only when supported in the soil by the roots, right? I have to be able to support that intervention up top or it won't work. And so sometimes we have our strategies that we're getting these flower strategies and we aren't making sure that the roots are fostered for that strategy, or we don't even know to look for that, right? But I will tell you, it's so much more fun to be able to work from a soil-based perspective because this is why we became teachers, right? This is why we became important adults in a kid's life. This is what they need are these relationships in the soil. And it's so awesome when we do this. And it's, something that it, it's a million things. There's this is not an exhaustive list. It's literally just the things I thought of off the top of my head when I made this PowerPoint slide, right? It's so much, right, that we have control over when we think about just staff health. How is staff feeling? Do I feel happy and healthy? Because if I have to pee all day and I don't get a pee break, I might not be the best, right? At least at my best. Happy teachers make for happy students. We talk about things like environment, talking about things like regular coping practice and the SEL programs that everyone does in their schools now. And people will ask me like which SEL like program. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them that ODH or DEW, whatever it's called now. They have their recommended list of like, what SEL programs to do. The thing that I think about when it comes to like SEL curriculum is that we have to treat that curriculum as the jumping off point and not the whole thing, because I know how it goes where maybe the school counselor comes and does, a session once a month, and then, that binder goes up on the shelf and collects dust until next year. And the kind of work that is actual soil-based work is every day, all the time work. And so we can look at, second step and say, okay, here's the problem solving. How can we create, we'll have the counselor give this lesson, but then how do we replicate and reinforce all throughout the school year the same message, right? Because just like really anything else that we do in schools, we're talking about dosage, right? So I like to think about our, academic RTIs, all the things that we do for academics. And we do a really good job of, looking and identifying kiddos that, let's say, are struggling with reading, right? That's something that's identified pretty quickly. And that child is given some tier 3 supports. Maybe they might be given an IEP, or they might get something that's uniquely theirs. But then they're also going to be put into that title group of kids that get pulled out, who get that kind of second dose, good small group instruction. And then the everyday stuff we do in the soil is, the reading to friend, the reading at the carpet. We're, mapping sentences and words, and we're using grammar, and we're doing phonics, and all of that stuff. That language arts stuff is the tier 1 stuff. And so when it comes to behavior, I think we're actually really doing good at a tier 2 and tier 3, because we at a tier 3 level, we have IEP goals, we have individual supports, individual brain like breaks and things like that. At a tier 2 level, we tend to have really great social groups and social programming for kids to get connected. Where we're kind of missing, there's a gap in that tier 1 soil space. And I would say that probably, like, I don't know, so many times people will say to me, well, we're good with tier 1. We just need more supports for tier 2 and tier 3. And and as much as I can hear that, what we need to know is that the supports for tier 2 and tier 3 students are tier 1 supports. They are supports that we all need to put in place for everyone. And so how do we start building that over time? So I'm going to talk first about environment. So, environment it's broad. I think of it as kind of everything I see here and have to follow while I'm in the room, right? So whether it's the classroom, the office, a hallway, whether we're talking about the tables or the pencil sharpener or the tissues, or maybe we're talking about the policies or the procedures or the routines that we uphold. I kind of look at all of those things, and I kind of tally that on a spectrum. And on one end of the spectrum is things that also happen in jail. right? So like this is true of every school building. I mean, it's true of my own home. I lock my door. Like that also happens in jail, right? Like we have kids have to ask permission to go to the restroom. That's something that also happens in jail, right? I'm not saying that's good or bad. What I just know is that what it is not is Cheers. And on the other side of this spectrum is Cheers. So if you aren't familiar, I've been seeing a lot of young people lately, and it's really dating me. So Cheers was a television show that was on in the 80s, and it was about a bar. Please, please don't bring alcohol into your classrooms. That is not what I'm saying at all. But Cheers had this awesome theme song, and the theme song, it went like this. It went, "You wanna go where everybody knows your name, bum 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 bum, and they're always glad you came," right? That's what we want to build. Everyone knows your name. Everyone's glad you came, right? That home, that space that feels safe and comfortable. And I'm sure many of you guys have spaces like that in your life, right? You probably have, I don't know, maybe it's a bar, maybe it's a church, maybe it's a place you like to volunteer at, a friend's house, a family member's house, a community space. I think we all tend to have these spaces where we feel like we belong and we feel connected to the people there. And so, how do we make our classrooms and our schools more like that? Because I think that sometimes when I say things like, oh, let's go to Cheers, let's kind of do things like Cheers, sometimes people think that that means that kids can do whatever the heck they want, right? Like kids will run amok, everyone will be crazy and do everything crazy. And I don't mean that because I imagine in the spot that you're at, right? That Cheers space that's yours that you love, it probably would not be okay for me to show up to that space and like smack someone in the face. Right? That probably wouldn't fly. It probably wouldn't be okay for me to go to your personal Cheers and just swear someone up and down. Probably wouldn't be okay. What's crazy about these two extremes on the sides of this spectrum is that the they have the same expectations and boundaries. They're just enforced differently. So they have those same expectations and boundaries. They're just enforced differently. Where the Cheers model is from a community-based support, right? Of building community norms. We know you wouldn't be able to do that because that would not be normal for our community, right? So how do we start to look at the things that we're doing every day and in class that how can we get it just maybe an inch closer to Cheers? I don't think everything's going to go like 180 degrees, right? And completely turn around. And, or should it? I don't mean that either, but I do find that the stronger I move things to that Cheers space, the more fun I'm having and the better time the kids are having as well. So I wanted to give an example of like a basic environment with that flower intervention pool as well, because I think that talking about a visual schedule is a helpful way to think about pulling down into the roots, right? So let's say you have a student who I mean you've probably never had a student like this, but maybe a student who's like, what time is it, how much longer do we have to do this, when are we done, when do we get to go to lunch, right? Sure, you've never had a kid like that, right? um but that's called hypervigilance, and a really common intervention for that is a visual schedule. And I'm sure that you've all seen some format of a visual schedule where it's like a uh, kids have maybe a dry erase that they're checking off through the day. Maybe younger kids tend to have some like Velcro things. Our older middle and high school kids tend to do or look more like this, the middle school one that's like Monday, Tuesday, where they'll write into their planners what they're going to be doing and then checking it off. It's just checking an agenda. Some of us just need that checking of agenda. And so when that intervention comes to my space, it's not just his intervention, it's our intervention, right? And so, how am I going to make sure that that intervention is being supported down into the roots? So, Do I have the same agenda written on my board that he has in his planner? Am I checking off along the way as they're checking off along the way? Am I the kind of person who commonly says things like, oh, well, we didn't get to that last math problem. That's okay. We'll go to lunch. And then after lunch, we'll do this before we do our daily five. We'll do that last math problem. If I'm a kind of person who does that a lot, well, now all of a sudden that soil's not rich for that intervention anymore, right? It was before, but now I've changed something and now the soil is not rich for it. But here's the deal. I mean, crap happens all the time, right? We have assemblies, we have fire drills. Shoot, we just didn't get to that last math problem. Like crap happens all the time. So when crap happens, add crap, fertilizer. So when crap happens, add crap, right? I now know that my soil needs a little bit of zhuzhin, right? Because something changed in my soil. So it's not anything fancy, crazy, or big. It's, oh my goodness, we didn't get to that math problem. We'll do it right before the daily five. And then I'm going to walk over to those tier two kids that I know are going to be stressed about this. And I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, here we go again. I'm always messing up the schedule. What do we do when things mess up? Let's take a nice big deep breath. All right, let's make sure your schedule looks just like mine. Yep, you moved that over there. Perfect. High five. Woo! Awesome. That's it. That's all that fertilizer has to look like. It's just acknowledging that the soil has changed and giving just a tiny little bit of extra dosage in there. I think I really like using that example because we get so many interventions that are like that, actual things that you can see and touch, and sometimes it's hard to really think about how we are supporting it in a classroom. But that's a great example of that. Same thing if students are getting, are in social groups or are in, lunch bunch or something like that, and they're learning how to butterfly breathe. Are we also butterfly breathing in the classroom all day long? Because I want to make sure that we're giving the maximum amount of dosage to this information as possible. So continuing our environment question our conversation and moving into really our concepts of our PBIS, right? So, PBIS is sometimes I feel like we've all got a lot of really pretty posters, right? And I like those. Sometimes I call that implementation by lamination, right? That it's just like it's done. But expectations are crazy, and the we have to be saying expectations a zillion times over to everyone all the time because human beings do not listen. Human beings don't listen, right? I would even venture to believe that there are people who are signed on right now that are not listening, and that's okay, right? Because people don't listen. We just don't. We have natural attention that will loop, right? So like you'll say, "Oh, Missy just changed this PowerPoint presentation slide." And okay, so now I'm reading all of those words. Okay, so when I get to Target on the way home, I make sure I grab this, that, and the other, and gotta get gas on the way home. And then oh wait, she changed the PowerPoint slide again, right? This is what we do. We kind of go through these cycles of attention, and that's a normal, typical thing to experience. So we have to be understanding that kids are also not listening, not because they're jerks, but because they're humans, right? And this is what we do. And it's not my job to catch you in not listening, right? It's my job to give you the best opportunity to meet the request. And I can say those expectations a million times over. We're about to walk out to the bathroom. What is this? What are we supposed to be, right? When we're in the hallways. Hey, you're at the high school football game. What does that look like, right? Like, what are the expectations? Making sure that we really are having this conversation over and over and over again so that they have the ability to sink in a little bit more. However, I will also say that human beings, we also will like willfully break expectations, right? Like, I mean, we break the rules on purpose kind of a lot too, even us as adults. Like I'm sure none of you guys, I mean, we've been hanging here for, 40 minutes. I'm sure none of you have, worked on anything else or played any cell phone games while we've been talking or walked away, possibly. Right? We break expectations. That's also what we do. But the difference is that we as adults, we actually know how to break expectations at a half a piece of cheesecake level. Hang in with me. All right. So have you ever like been on a diet and then you give yourself a cheat day and then you go to like your cousin's graduation party and there's a cheesecake there and you're like, "Oh my God, it's been so long since I've had cheesecake and I love cheesecake. Who knows when I'm ever going to get cheesecake again? And oh my God, it's my cheat day, so I will have 4 pieces of cheesecake." Maybe that's just me, maybe just me, right? That's how kids act sometimes, right? When they're given any amount of freedom or any amount of space, right? They act crazy. And sometimes that reinforces our fears, right? And we'll say, "I knew you couldn't handle it. That's why," right? And we try to tighten things up when really we should kind of let it ride for a minute because we could actually explicitly teach kids how to misbehave at a half a piece of cheesecake level, right? Like, how do you say a snippet to a friend and then come back to learning, right? How do you quick do this little thing, then come back to learning, right? Those are skills that we've had to learn trial and error. It doesn't have to be that way. We could be teaching, "Hey, if you're not going to follow the rules, here's where the limit is on that," right? Because we know that that's the reality of us as human beings. We ourselves would not be able to uphold the expectations that we put on children every day. And so we need to give them the best opportunity by repeating it over and over and over again. I mean, even just like what we're doing, we're on page 324. Yay, I'm so happy that I see some folks on 324. John, loving that your hand hygiene's important, but we're on 324, right? Like just continuing to say what we're doing in that moment so that kids have the best possible chance to meet our request. And then just recognizing that they are going to be human and that we at times have to really balance out that kind of cost benefit for, okay, so I see those students talking. Is it going to be, is their talking more disruptive than my intervention would be? Or would my intervention be more disruptive, right? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So I have to balance that out, right? Because in a lot of ways, kids are able to kind of filter out stuff that we don't filter out necessarily. And so if we bring it to attention, it actually can cause a larger disruption when we didn't have to. But anyway, I like saying expectations as much as possible. And then I love our
Hey,
matrix. So,
Missy, we did have a couple shares in the chat
oh,
that were
yay.
your last two slides.
Let me look. Oh, yay. Oh, yay. Hi. Um, Terry said, "I think a big issue is that the aspect of having a supportive, healthy staff and that the community involvement is not happening. Many teachers have forgotten their why." I think that I don't know that they've forgotten their why. I think that it can be really difficult when I know that you guys are all experiencing behaviors that maybe you haven't before COVID, right? And we're all kind of sick of blaming COVID on everything, and we're wondering what's happening and how kids' relationships are changing with each other, and it gets in the way of what the joy that we want to have in the work that we do. And I think that when we get bogged down in those behaviors over and over again, it just isn't fun. And it doesn't, so it does make me forget, like, why am I even doing this? Right. That I'm going home every day feeling like crap. Right. And that's why when we look at it from a soil perspective, it really is putting you in a position as a teacher to just have fun and be that like oh, captain, my captain kind of teacher that we all thought we wanted to be, right? Like none of us came into this kind of work. We're not excited about sending kids out of the classroom. Like that's not what we wanted to do. And I think that the more we talk with each other about how we're feeling in this work, the more we are open and willing to be honest with how we're feeling about this work with each other. I think that that helps because I think sometimes because in education we tend to be like the people who get stuff done. Like this is the people who get stuff done. And so it can be hard sometimes to feel like overwhelmed. And so maybe I'll say to someone, oh, I'm doing fine. And really though, I'm not. And that can be really hard, and feel very isolating. And so, I think that there's a lot of reasons why this issue may exist, but I think that, um, recognizing it and talking about how we as a community should be supporting each other, I think is a great starting point. Um, we have students have been better since they don't have access to cell phones. Yeah, I find that interesting. I mean, I think we're better when we don't have access to our cell phones too. Um, it's I think that it's one of those things that is we're in the midst of change. As it was with the internet. I think about that now that AI is coming up and everything that's like all of this like technology changes. We have to be able to start learning how to do those things side by side. And but we're not good at it as adults yet. And so once we figure it out, maybe we can help them. But I do like that kids are given an opportunity to be off their phones. I also like it when they get opportunities to be off their Chromebooks. There are lots of schools that I go to that the students are on their Chromebooks the whole day. And so we're not doing any. I had one kid, he was a second grader, and his behavior was he was screaming, and he was mad because he wanted real math. And what he meant was he just wanted math on a paper, like on a piece of paper, and not the math on the Chromebook, right? So I think some of us still really need that tangible thing. And it is good to have a balance of that. Awesome. Those were great comments. Thank you, Beth. Of one-to-one at our charter school and almost all of my math on paper. Yeah. Yeah. Paper math, I mean, it is one of those things. I mean, I'm bad at math anyway, but I'll tell you those things, they're valuable. Kids like doing things that are tangible, and it stretches their brains in different ways. If we do everything on a computer, then our brain only gets programmed one way. So to be able to do that on paper is really important. Um, okay, so when I look at expectations, so this is the like a sample matrix of what I imagine you see in your schools, right? There's your main three to five expectations, and then you have that's what it looks like in the classroom, that's what it looks like in the hallways, that's what it looks like, right? And so we print these off, but I actually would like for us to use these more like working documents instead of just being something that is posted, actually using this to help us identify appropriate interventions. So, for example, when we have a student who isn't reading at grade level, right? We have these interventions that are very specific to their specific need, right? We look and kind of piece out what is happening, right? Is this fluency? Is this, comprehension? We're trying to see where the deficit is, and then we're putting interventions in place. We don't always do that with behavior. We often throw the same intervention at the behavior without really piecing out maybe what skill is missing. So I want to kind of go through this in a way, just using just using respect as the example. So I'm trying to move you. So I can see, there we go. So be respectful. So first off, be respectful is almost every school I've ever been to. That's one of their rules. And I think that we need to remember that respectful is one of the most difficult expectations to maintain as a human being because there's so much variety to what respect means to people based on cultural reasons, socioeconomic reasons, even familial reasons. Respect can mean different things. So we have to be really clear about what that means to me personally. So I I give the example like so my parents, I was raised by two musicians. So every adult in my life that I ever met, even family members, I was told to call them by their first name. It would have never occurred to me that another adult would see me doing that and deem it disrespectful. I would not have even thought that that was something that would happen, right? But lots of people find that disrespectful when children refer to adults by their first name. And I'm still, even to this day, I prefer actually to be called by my first name for similar reasons. And so I've had teachers, I'll go into their classrooms and they'll say, well, what do you want the kids to call you? And I'll say, oh, they can just call me Missy. Usually I get some sort of like, ooh, can they call you Miss Missy? Right. And then they'll say, oh, well, we're trying to show respect for our elders. And I haven't yet had the guts, but I feel like maybe one time I will have the guts to be like, all right, so you asked me what I wanted the kids to call me, and now you're going to tell them to call me something different than that. And we're talking about respect, right? The thing about it is, though, is that whatever you feel is respect in your space, that's correct, as long as you're clear about it. If I go into a classroom and a teacher says, oh, in our classroom, we show respect to elders by calling them by their surname. Is Ms. McClain okay for you? Well, that's a whole different setup of expectations for me. I can meet your expectation when we don't assume that we have the same, right? And kids are really good at this. They are able to know what's okay in Miss Jones's class versus Mrs. Johnson's class. Like they can understand those differences in what we need. So we have to be very clear about just respectful in general. But once you start looking at some of these expectations, so like the very first one is keep hands and feet to self, right? Okay, there's lots of kids who show this behavior, right? And sometimes it's a mistake, right? I mean, we all make mistakes. Maybe something really exciting happened and I'm like celebrating and I accidentally hit somebody, right? That mistake happens. And as the adult in the space, I can, reinforce expectations. I can ask for, for that child to repair the harm. But it was just a mistake, right? Because we as humans, we make mistakes. Um, but when you start to see a child make the same mistake over and over and over again, right? That's when a conversation needs to happen because we do this with literacy, as I said. If you forget the silent E once, we'll reteach it or be like, oh my goodness, I forgot it. It was a mistake. But if you start seeing me miss that silent E over and over and over again, it would occur to us to say, wait, let's pull this out. Let's see if there's something going on here. And that's what we can do with these behavior expectations. So if it's keep hands, feet, self, and the kid just continues to break that expectation, well, we can ask ourselves, well, what is the prerequisite skill that's missing? Because for us to keep our hands and feet to ourselves, we have to have body awareness. We have to have emotional regulation. We have to know boundaries. We have to, I mean, there's so many things that it could be. And so if we identify maybe for one child that it's boundaries, right? Well, another child, it might be for emotional regulation. So I can't use the same intervention on these two children who are actually missing two different skill sets, right? So we would be doing intervention for the emotional regulation kiddo somewhere else, right? And this is the boundaries. Then we go on to classroom strategies. This is my Pinterest. I have over 5,000 different strategies and things that you can do that help reiterate these expectations over and over and over again and help teach them. My boundaries page has like over 200. My boundaries board itself has 200. So that's when you start looking for the strategy, but not just the strategy for that individual child, but for everyone, because now we've recognized that the dosage of boundaries has to get beefed up, right? So how am I saying, oh, you're at my desk, that's my boundaries, right? Make sure you're in your dancing space and I'm in my dancing space, right? We're regularly repeating these conversations, having these conversations with each other all the time, so that that child is getting boundaries heavy conversation in class, boundaries heavy conversation in that small social group, and they have a boundaries expectation goal on their IEP. Now they're getting the full dosage of that multi-tiered systems of support. And then to kind of round things out, we have to make sure that we always remember our own role modeling, because I think sometimes we don't we don't always follow the rules either. And so we have to think about how our actions are going to reinforce different behaviors. I think about this with boundaries all the time because I've been there. This is super close work that we do, right? And so, sometimes you could be just doing active supervision and you kind of walk by someone and see something real quick and then kind of go back and you're coming from behind like, hey, maybe you could try it like this. But you look like a big scary monster coming at them, right? From above. And that might put them in a space where they're like, ah, right? And we should recognize, oh my goodness, I just totally breached into your boundaries. I'm sorry, right? Because we all have that respect in our classroom, not just the students, but us too. Again, this is close work we do. So we could even say things like, hey, I'm coming in hot to check your work, right? That is an excellent way to just prep someone for, hey, I'm coming into your boundaries. And it's a good modeling for other kiddos in the space. Um, oh, there we go. So we talked about kind of the basic environment piece. We talked about looking at those expectations and the repetition of those expectations. And we looked at the matrix as a tool that we can use to identify where the social and emotional deficit might be, and then what interventions might be more successful. And I always want to kind of end on, it's not ending, but I wrap it up with this thought because I think sometimes, you know, like I'm like a sunshine, lollipops and rainbows kind of person. Like, and I understand that like my personality is not other people's personality, right? And that sometimes it's hard to feel like you have to fit into a box of acknowledging kids or connecting with kids, because many of you connect with kids in ways that are completely opposite in ways that I would connect with kids. Kids need lots of different options of connection. And so the one tool that I really like to make sure I remember always is just noticing kids. There are so many kids who feel invisible. I mean, I think, whether or not that's true doesn't matter. I think there are lots of kids that feel invisible, especially as we move into our bell schedules, where we have kids who will go the whole day without an adult looking at them directly in the face and saying something to them personally, right? They'll get spoken at, but not to. Um, and so how can we just start noticing kids? And it doesn't have to be, you know, gumdrops and lollipops. It can be like, hey, you got a new book bag. For all he knows, I hate it. I don't know, right? But just noticing that kids are here. I see you, and it's important that you're here to me. I think that that would just go such a long way. So try and continue to do this. I know that so many of you guys are standing at those doors, you're doing all of this. But I always like to think about the ways that we acknowledge, because when you're looking at acknowledgement, I think sometimes um people think acknowledgement has to be like a reward, right? And when we talk about PBIS, they'll say things like, oh, yeah, this is how we're doing JoJo for this, or we're collecting fuzzies for this. And that's not what PBIS is. PBIS is the multi-tiered systems of support. And in the tiered fidelity inventory, nowhere does it say reward. it's acknowledgement. And I think even knowing that is a lot for me. Like it changes the way I understand what I'm supposed to be doing, right? It's not reward, it's acknowledgement. So how am I giving acknowledgement in a way that is positive, in a way that is welcoming, right? I've seen this done a million times over in so many great spaces. One of my favorites to talk about is this isn't a picture of it, but it's a picture like it. It was a high school actually that she made one of her whole bulletin boards a refrigerator, and she had like the little like ABC magnets, and she had them like as push pins. And the high schoolers were so funny. They were so cute. They like were obsessed with, they're like, oh, come see my, like, come see what have on the fridge, right? These high school kids just loving that this teacher acknowledged their work and put it up on the fridge, right? It's something silly that really means a lot to kids. And I think that, when we're using tickets or trinkets and toys, I mean, it's fine to get a reward, I mean, it's not a bad thing that I get paid for my job. Um, but it's also not the reason I do my job. Because if it was the reason I did my job, I would find a different job. Because I don't make very much money, right? But how is it that I can do something that is for this community? How do we build that? It's not just through reward, it's through connection and acknowledgement. And so how can we make it something that's more personal? Because kids aren't desperate for trinkets and treasure and candy, right? Kids are desperate for eye-to-eye contact. They're desperate for adult approval, right? They want to make us happy even when they pretend they don't, right? And if we can give them those moments, it really can make a huge difference for them. So other things that we can do, as I said, we're looking at this soil, how we're building this dosage up over time. We can talk about how kids are feeling. All kids, but especially kids who've experienced trauma, have a very small vocabulary for emotions. And we just kind of let them get away with happy, sad, and mad, right? Where we actually could be introducing huge amounts of words and doing all kinds of fun ways doing this. Just our own modeling, right? We can say, oh, I'm so ecstatic to see you today. I was so forlorn yesterday without you, right? Using crazy words so that they're hearing those words, but then giving them opportunities to share how they're feeling in ways that maybe are unexpected. So, I'm going to reference this. It's called the first five. I'm going to give you a link for it at the end of our session. I don't make any money off of it. It's a free thing that you can get. I just really like the resource. What the resource is it's someone sends you an email every school day, and you just click on whether you're like preschool, primary, secondary, and then it brings up like kind of an old school blog. And you like scroll through the blog, and every day there's a different way to assess your feelings. There's a whole set of questions that you can ask kids. There's usually a video of some sort, and every day it's different, all SEL stuff. But that's where I got the Sandcastle and the Taylor Swift. They're always fun, and you can literally copy the image and paste it right into a PowerPoint. So it's cheap, it's easy, it comes into your inbox, no work needed. But I love that because when you look at like the Sandcastle one, right? I think sometimes we think that we have to get all like mushy gushy and talk about feelings like so crazy, but this is an easy way to talk about feelings that really doesn't have to put me in a place of vulnerability, right? But it puts me in a place where I'm sharing what I'm feeling and maybe how ready I am for the rest of the day. But I love that first five. It gives lots of good examples. I also know that there are lots of schools that are doing like it's like this top one with the girl in her picture. I find this especially helpful in special ed classrooms, where they're creating like emotion charts with the student's face. So, what do you look like when you're happy? What do you look like when you're mad? And then we actually create an emotions chart using their face so that it's not, because I mean, sometimes you're looking at this emoji chart and like, well, I don't feel like this yellow blob, right? But I do feel like this. That's my face. And I think that that can be really helpful. Also, there are so many emotion words out there. I don't know that there will ever be a limit. I do this work every single day and I am learning new words all the time. Um, two new words, two emotional new words that I have that I've learned this fall. Sonder. So sonder is when you are in like in public and you start to recognize that like you like kind of look at other people and you like it occurs to you that like that person has like their whole life and like a whole job and like a whole family and like a whole like friend group and a whole bubble of life that I'm never going to be a part of, right? That realization is called sonder. I also learned collective effervescence. And collective effervescence is what we feel when we're at a concert or when we're at, fireworks or when we are in something that's public together and it's just bubbly and excited and happy. There are so many words out there. I have had so many teachers, like foreign language teachers, take advantage of this because there are a lot of foreign language words that describe emotions that we have as English speakers, but we don't have a word for as English speakers. So, most commonly known is Schadenfreude. So, Schadenfreude is a
Yeah, for
German word,
another 20
and
minutes.
it means, oh, sorry, and it means like the joy and the like wanting to laugh that we have when we see someone fall or when we see someone fail at something, right? Schadenfreude is the reason why like America's Funniest Home Videos was on for so long, right? Um, there's also a funny, I can't remember how to pronounce it, but there's a Japanese word that that is the feeling of when you open the refrigerator and you're just looking at stuff and you're not really hungry, right? You're just looking at stuff. The Japanese have a word for that. And the literal translation translates into your mouth is lonely, which I think is crazy, right? There are so many great emotion words out there. There's so many ways to help kids build that vocabulary, and kids are very good at this. A lot younger than you'd think. It's so fun when we hear even our littlest ones use a pretty good variety of language. So the everyday practicing of coping mechanisms, this is just putting this work into your everyday routine. Like I said, when it comes to like that social emotional curriculum, like that's something that might take like a 42-minute lesson from a counselor. But this is the stuff that we're just doing all the time that is working for us. So, for example, I just had this last week. Someone came to me and talked to me about how she started implementing deep breathing in her kindergarten classroom and like what a huge difference it's made for her as opposed to years past. And I will say that it is pretty phenomenal with deep breathing, especially. I mean, deep breathing is like the easiest, the cheapest, the fastest thing to implement, right? And it really, really makes a difference. And I think I probably mentioned that in the last session, to give that a try. Was anyone able to try some deep breathing and have any success? You could put it in the chat. I have it open now, so I'll be able to read it. But it really makes a huge difference. Like I said, so easy. I had a teacher also. This was a bell schedule. It was high school, and she had like it was that time like before the tardy bell rings, you know, that like kind of meandering time. So kids were allowed to come into the classroom, but the expectations once they were in the classroom was that they had to be standing and they had to be stretching. Um, and it was just funny. I got to see so many funny examples of like these kids that are like, oh my gosh, he did not say that to you. That is so crazy, right? Like seeing all these kids be normal kids while also stretching. And then once the tardy bell rang in her class, it was very Pavlovian. They all sat down and they kept stretching. It was now they have to be in their seat and they're still stretching. And the teacher started every class period with, all right, everybody take a big deep breath in, out. All right, here's where we're gonna go. Bop, bop, bop. And it was just putting it into that routine of every day between every class, right? We're getting this opportunity to practice this coping mechanism. And if you remember the last time we talked about that stress stove dial, right? And that heat always getting turned up all day long. And so we can do things that help turn that heat down all day long, right? Like stretching, like deep breathing, like all the different ways that we can practice positive coping. Oh, good. I have a couple folks. So Sarah said she tries it for most of her SEL classes and definitely see a difference. I'm so glad that you do. It's awesome. It's so easy and cheap. We did it for a few days after last meeting, but then I kept forgetting. I know it's hard, and it's one of those things that even I forget to do a lot of times. But when I find kind of like making it into like a routine or like almost like a lesson plan for it, right? Just so that it's just becomes something that is automatic. Breathing work is something I use for all my classes. That's awesome, Patricia. Terry wrote, we used to have mindfulness time with an instructor that came in each week. Oh, that sounds awesome. And would go into designated classes each period. Funding loss took that resource away. Bummer, but that sounds awesome. But yeah, that's the teaching of these skills that kids need, right? Because like we said, they need to cope. So we need to teach them how to do the things that will help them cope in ways that are healthy for themselves and for the community at large. That's awesome. I'm glad some of you guys have had success with that. So I also like to remember and always remind folks that you guys are doing SEL work all the time. And I want you guys to be able to articulate and give credit where credit's due. Because if someone's asking you when you're doing SEL, I know you're already doing a ton of it. It might not look like the second step SEL lesson, right? But it will look like in social studies, we're talking about how do you think that person felt when they went through that? What would you have done differently to solve that conflict? That is all social and emotional learning. And I want you guys to be able to say, yes, I am doing this work all the time, because you really, truly are. It's happening all the time in ELA. I see it everywhere, right? We spend a lot of time talking about how characters feel or what their motivations are, or what they could do differently. One school that I really loved, she had her spelling words. She had like her 10 trick words every day, and then she added a one emotions word every week. So they would learn how to spell that emotions word. She would read books on that emotions word. They would have lessons talking about that emotions word, just so that by the end of the school year, they had been introduced to quite a few new emotions words. I thought that was super cool. I have someone else sharing. Karen said, would it be better to do it first thing in the morning, like during morning meeting, or later during the lesson? So I actually think that doing it all day, I don't mean like all day, like only deep breathe. I mean, you should be breathing every day, but yeah, doing it as we're getting together in the morning. You can do this as we are moving from carpets to tables. We could do this as we just put all of our folders away. Now we're coming back to this. Now let's take a deep breath and get started. And you can also, I find with deep breathing, it's helpful to do, or to think of it as a part of your, like quiet down routine. Like, I know you guys probably already have something that's like, like 1, 2, 3, eyes on me, or something like that. Lots of folks have. And, I suggest adding it onto that. So 1, 2, 3, eyes on me, deep breath in, deep breath out, because you are already identifying that everyone needs to calm down, right? So in my mind, I'm saying like, okay, I'm waiting. I'll wait for you guys till I start. I'm saying they need to take a deep breath, and I can add that to that routine. Oh, Christy said we did it in 7th grade science last week before I passed back their first unit test. It was proactive practice before they saw their grades. That's awesome. That's really great. Well, I hope that everyone did well. And they could take those breaths before they take their test too, because it could affect or impact positive grades. So that's awesome. So we talked about how this works in social studies and history. We talked about how it can work in ELA. I see this all the time, even in science and math. And I know that when it comes to STEM folks tend to be the last people that are like, yeah, I do SEL work, but they do. I mean, there's so much personal growth that happens during that productive math struggle, right? To be able to have perseverance, to have patience. We do so much work in math, particularly, but also in science. Basically, the entire scientific method is SEL work. The one I really like to show, though, is this math one here. I saw a teacher that did this. I just thought it was fun. I'm not a math person, so I don't really like, I'm not good with math, but the one that I like, they're called emotional equations. And I have them both on my Pinterest and my live binder. But she said that she liked them because they not only helped the kids remember or learn the word, but they were also then able to remember certain like formulas or certain math equations better. The one I like to say is the disappointment equals expectations minus reality. Right? Like that's a good way of figuring out what disappointment is, right? But you can see there's so many different other ways to do this, and this is just a small example too. But yeah, we can do this work in a lot of spaces. I see classrooms everywhere that have it like calming spaces, that have respect agreements, that everyone is writing, being as specific as possible with each other. Really, practicing whole body listening, right? Looking at, I love positive feedback. So I think we do this a lot in ELA with older grades as we're starting to do like a lot of grading each other stuff, where we talk about what it means to give positive feedback and constructive criticism. We can do the same for social and emotional experiences. So, how do you ask someone to respect your boundary, right? What does that actually look like and sound like? And having those kinds of conversations make for really great anchor charts, but also really get great practices in your space. I loved a teacher. She had it was Antarctica in her space, and she used it all the time, and I loved her modeling of it. Like she would be like, I am so stressed, I gotta go chill out, and she would go and chill out in Antarctica, and I thought that was so funny. But the kids really liked it too, right? Those calming spaces really should be spaces that are available to everyone all the time. They will be used by everyone at a 4 piece of cheesecake level for a little bit. But then it'll ease down and it will only be used by the kids who really need it. Um, in all of our extracurriculars, there's SEL everywhere, right? In our library, in our music, in our PE, in our sports. I think so much about our sports teams that we use restorative practices and restorative justice in our sports teams. We win as a team, we lose as a team, right? They do such a good job of that. And remembering that we are doing this work is so important. Like I said, I want to give credit where credit's due. You guys are doing this work all day long. So the way I wanted to kind of end our conversation, so 80 to 95% of the work is that soil, right? Um, as I said, I think our tier 2 and tier 3 supports tend to be really strong. The one thing though that I think that every adult should have is a usable de-escalation tool. I just think everyone should have an opportunity to be able to de-escalate a student if they need to, and that's technically a tier 3 support. But you don't have to be like a tier 3 practitioner to do this tier 3 support, right? But I like to think about that upset, right? Like when that heat gets turned all the way up to a 10, right? What does this look like? So I actually like this graph because to me, it helps me recognize that it's a predictable arc, right? Maybe not from one kid to another, right? But you could start figuring out what my arc looks like. So this arc is a way of saying, okay, I'm upset. Now I'm at a pinnacle of my upset, and now I'm calming down. Sometimes when we de-escalate, we expect that a student could go right from the top of that arc straight down. And it's never going to happen that way, right? They have to finish their arc. So there are things that we can do that help grease the wheels of that arc, right? Help it move faster, help it move more successfully. And then there are things that we can do that sometimes put some roadblocks in the way. So when we are, really close to them, if we're yelling, if we're making threats, if we're, you know, uh, kind of putting too much attention on them, all of those things can be roadblocks for them. And it can take a situation that maybe could be resolved in like 60 seconds and turn us into like a 60-minute like hellscape for everyone involved, right? So, how do we avoid those roadblocks and really start pushing the gas with these greasy wheels? And those are, validation. I can see that you're upset. Choices, not too many choices sometimes. Right, we don't want to be like, well, you could take a break or you could go get a drink of water. You could go to drink water, you could go to Miss Jones's room, or you could take a break. You could take a break, you could go to Mrs. Jones' room, you could go to the Antarctica, or you could go to, right, we start piling on these choices, and it just becomes overwhelming. But if we give just kind of a this that two option question, that's pretty helpful. We want to make sure that we are giving them space, really allowing them to kind of feel this feeling, and recognize that it's valid. And then what I like to do is that each kid, we can start kind of detailing what their arc is going to look like. So this is crazy. I know there's so many words on this page, but I call this the progression of acceleration. So with any student that you are working with, you can fill out these squares for that student. On my live binder, I have like a blank one of these, but I'm confident you could just make squares. It's not that hard of a graph to make. But I first like to put what triggers exist that I know already exist, right, for that child. It's going to look different for every kid, but you can see that Missy, her triggers are putting a Chromebook away, getting called out, or others breaking into her boundaries. So I know that those are going to be some triggers that are going to upset her. Um, and then when I start looking at, okay, what do they look like just when they're good, right? Like, what does good look like for them? Because it might be different for every kid, where you can see here, Missy, she's giving you eye contact, she's sitting in her seat, she's fidgeting with a pen, and she's doodling. I think of this as that focused space, right? We all have things that we do when we're focused that might not technically be like focused behavior, but like maybe we're tapping our foot, or maybe we're, standing, but we're focused. This is that goal behavior. So whatever we're looking for right now in this moment, we want our student to be in this appropriate on task focused space. As I said, recognizing what the triggers are is really just kind of the starting point in my mind, because it's the spot where we are implementing strategies. So, of course, you have to put your Chromebook away, right? You don't get to just have your Chromebook open all the time. But I know that's something that bothers Missy. So, what can I put in place? What can we talk about? What could we do as a class? What could I do 2 minutes before we put Chromebooks away that can help that initiate that coping mechanism for that child in that moment, and keep them on task as much as possible. But we know that that doesn't always happen. And those kids that might experience triggers then pop up into that squirrely zone. And squirrely zone to me is the most important square on this whole page. This is, it's unfocused. So this is like they're not upset yet. They're just, wandering around the room. You can see here, like Missy is, my eyes are wandering, full blown drawing, up and moving, talking to others, right? The reason that this square is the most important on the whole page is because this square is the only time that all of the redirections that we've learned will work. So if I say her name, she'll come back to learning. If I give her physical space proximity, she'll come back to learning. If I ask her to come up on the whiteboard and do something with me, she'll come back to learning. If I ask her to help a friend, she'll come back to learning, right? Those tools will only work during squirrely time. they will not work once the student has moved into this 10 focused acceleration space. And sometimes we get so focused on the acceleration behaviors that we miss the squirrely behaviors, right? Because we're kind of focused in on what those acceleration behaviors are. But you can see Missy is, she's going to get loud, she's going to have an aggressive voice, and she's going to cry. That is that focused acceleration. It's weird to think of it as focus, but it is. It's like, I'm dumping over this chair. Now I'm dumping over this chair. Now I'm dumping over this chair, right? It is a weird focus because it's not focused on what we want them to be focused on, but it is a focus. So once we see that focus in that acceleration space, we need to de-escalate. My only goal in de-escalation is to de-escalate a 10 to an 8 so that I can redirect back to a 6 and get back to work. That's my only goal. We're not going to talk about consequences now. We're not going to talk about problem solving. We're not going to talk about any of that right now. My only goal is to get a 10 de-escalated to an 8 so that I can redirect to back to what we're doing. So the de-escalation tool that I use the most, I didn't make it up, but it's super easy. It's just talk about something else. It's super weird when you first start practicing it, but it's just talk about something else, change the subject, make bland observations, ask questions. I had a little one. We were It was a gymnasium. All the kids were lined up in the gymnasium for their buses at the end of the day. And I was with the school counselor at the time, and we walked in, and a student was very upset. He was I think like second grade, and he was like really angry. His coat was on backwards. The hood was up over his face. He was screaming. He was swearing. And when I walked up, the teacher had him by the coat, and I was like, let go of the coat. And I just sat near him, and I saw that he had this backpack, and I just started talking. I said, "Hey, so I see that on your backpack, Batman is there, but he's wearing blue, and I thought that Batman wore black. Does Batman wear blue or black?" And he's swearing and roughing. And I said, though, I don't really know a whole lot about Batman. I don't know. Is he the Avengers or is he in the Justice League? And I hear like through the hood, Justice League. And I was like, oh. It's like if I were to pick my favorite in the Justice League, it'd probably be Wonder Woman. If I were to pick my favorite Avenger, it would probably be Captain Marvel. Who's your favorite Avenger? And he sits up and he pulls the hood down and he's like, Hulk. And I was like, I get it. Right. And I was like, that's awesome. At this point, I now know he's at an 8. And I said, hey, I've got these things here. I'm always carrying little things with me, like little coloring pages and little toys and things that are just meant to de-escalate. I said, I'm coloring these. Do you want to color with me? And that was the last thing I said. I don't know, maybe 45 seconds. He scooted his way over to me and started coloring. I let that go on for maybe a minute. And then I said, hey, you want to take some of these home with you? All right, you want me to walk you the bus? Awesome. He made it to the bus. That's how fast it happened. He still made the bus. But my only goal was to de-escalate that 10 to an 8 so that I could redirect back to a 6 and get them back to what we need to do. All that other conversation can happen later. I had an older student. This was in high school. He was sitting in a desk facing the wall in the back of the room, and I could see his squirrely behavior building, and he was very frustrated, and he stood up, and then he grabbed the chair and put it up over his head. And it was one of those like ceramic, like metal chairs. And I had started walking towards him already because I saw his squirrely. And so I just had my watch on at the time. And I was like, so, hey, they tell me I'm supposed to be able to check my steps on this, but I don't know how to. Do you know how to check the steps on my watch? And the chair went down and he was like, you have 6,000 steps. And I was like, I feel like I'm supposed to have more than that. And he was like, I don't know. I was like, what are you supposed to be doing here? What is this? It's a stupid thing. I was like, well, what is it? And he picked up his pencil and started showing me. My only goal was to get him from the 10 to an 8 so that I could get him back to a 6. We'll talk about all that other stuff later, after a sustained 6. Most common questions I get about this: who should do it? Whoever you want it to work for. So if you want the student to have positive behavior in your space, then it has to be you that does it. If I rely on someone else to do that, I will always have to rely on someone else. So the more I send a kid out of the class for this work, the more I will have to send him out of the class. The more I do this work in-house, the less I actually have to do it. I always say it's giving weight to your target eyebrows. So like when my kids are acting crazy at Target, like I can just be like, and they see that my eyebrows and they know what's going on, right? But that has weight. And so when you build these relationships through these conversations, you're giving weight to your eyebrows so you don't have to do it as often. It doesn't matter how old the child is. I've done this down to 18 months. I've do this with my husband regularly, one time with my 91-year-old grandma. It doesn't matter how well you know them. I do this with my own children all the time. I do this with stranger children all the time. One time a stranger adult woman at a cheer competition. Um, it's just one of those things that works. How long does it take? The more you practice, the faster it gets. It really is pretty quick. It doesn't have to be a surprise. I've had kids ask me to ask them the questions, right? They're like, I'm just so upset. Can you just like ask me the questions? So it doesn't have to be a surprise. It's just something that works. So I encourage you guys to give that a try. I hope more of you try some deep breathing as you go through into December. And I am excited to see you in December. December, we're going to be talking about recognizing your own burnout and strategies and lesson planning for yourself on how to take care of yourself so that you are that happy, healthy staff member that makes for happy, healthy kids. So thank you so much. I'm going to hang out if you guys have questions. Otherwise, I'm all done. Beth? Oh, I didn't show that other slide.
Yeah, I posted in the chat too. We do have a short evaluation. If you could do just to tell us, give us some feedback on the session and let us know what you're looking for with future sessions. So that link is in the chat.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Oh, awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Someone said they take it back to their staff, which is awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
And please share all these links, all this resources. Please share it with whoever is interested. A different link for the first five. It isn't working for me.
Yeah, I'm getting the same thing on the first five.
Oh no, that must mean my thing's wrong. If you just Google the first five, it's the first
Google.
thing that comes up.
Okay.
I'm so
I'll send it in our follow-up email too.
thank you. It must mean my link is wrong. I don't. So I could. Hannah asked if we could have these slides emailed to us. I could send this like specific PowerPoint to Beth and have Beth email it. But it is also on the live binder under the managing trauma in the classroom uh tab. Sorry. Yeah, interest-based de-escalation. Um, Beth, can you put the live binder link in the chat again? Um, it's kind of a little bit of an antiquated website, but it's free. Um, so I use it and I've yet to find like the limit on how much I can put on it. So when you get to that link, it'll have like kind of high level larger tabs and you click on those and then they open up like smaller tabs. Some of my it's basically links to all of my Google Drive stuff, and some of them, no matter how many times I change them to everyone has access, they just refuses to do that. So if it asks you to request access, just request. I will approve it right away.